One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. Today on the show, we are incredibly excited to have Michael Coscetta. Michael is a good friend of mine, a great member of Revenue Collective, but perhaps most importantly, he's the Chief Sales and Strategy Officer for Compass, that fast-growing real estate behemoth that he's going to tell us all about. And that's really an incredible success story over the past couple of years, just in terms of their ability to work with and attract the best brokers and build a massive brokerage community and give those people the tools that they need to succeed. And Michael talks about how he does that at scale and how he thinks about scale, given that he's responsible for thousands and thousands of different brokers all at Compass. So it's a great conversation. We're delighted to have him on the show. Now, before we get there, we've got a new sponsor for July, and that company is Conga. Businesses run on documents. Conga is changing the way the world works by modernizing, streamlining, and automating your documents, contracts, and processes to make it easier to do business. See why Conga is the #1 paid app on the Salesforce App Exchange with a free trial or demo today. Great company, Conga. And then the other sponsor that we have for you, I'm sure you can guess who it is. It is that wonderful sales engagement company that we call Outreach. Now, let me tell you about Outreach. Outreach revolutionizes customer engagement by moving away from siloed conversations to a streamlined and customer-centric journey. Leveraging the next generation of artificial intelligence, the platform allows sales reps to deliver consistent, relevant, and responsible communication for each prospect every time, enabling personalization at scale that was previously unthinkable. Go to www.outreach.io for more information. And now let's listen to my conversation with Michael Coscetta. Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. Today we are honored and excited to have on the show Michael Coscetta. Michael has 15 years of experience running global sales and product teams across multiple software and fintech companies. And right now he is the Chief Sales and Strategy Officer for the real estate company that most of us know that has become a household name over the course of the last couple of years, and that company is Compass. He's responsible for growing agent revenue across Compass' many markets, including the development of new revenue streams to the business. Compass finished 2019 over $2 billion in revenue, a big jump from $880 million in 2018. Before that, he was at Square, where he was Vice President of Global Sales. I think he was the predecessor to Ashley Grech, but I could be wrong, overseeing the growth of their sales and business development organization from 2 to 30 teams across the U.S. and 4 countries. While at Square, the business grew from $3 billion, a newly public company, $3 billion market cap, to a $35 billion plus innovative leader in global financial technology. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be here and looking forward to speaking to you today.
We're excited to have you. So here's the place where we start. We start with the baseball card, which is basically giving you an opportunity to both pitch Compass, a company that many of us know, but to hear it in your words and to also, frankly, tell us, what your role is. So you've written Michael. So I've called you prefer Michael. That's the accurate.
They're indistinguishable to me. Michael, either way. Seriously, I don't even think about it. Michael's my name, so that's what I just write. But you'll hear me say Mike all the time because it's 1 syllable versus 2.
But you're not offended if I say Mike by accident?
Not at all. Not at all.
Wonderful. I appreciate that.
I'm a New Yorker. We don't get offended.
So you're Chief Sales and Strategy Officer of Compass. There are 3 people out there in the world that don't know what Compass is. Give us your take. Give us what does Compass do? Who are they?
I feel bad for those 3 people because they're definitely missing out. So Compass took the largest asset class in the world, which is residential real estate, and said there's got to be a way to do it better. And it's one of the largest ticket items people will ever purchase or transact in their life. It is one of the industries that has remained somewhat cryptic and archaic in terms of lack of technology, lack of data access. And it's an industry that's really suffered from really innovation for a very long time. Yet it's a ubiquitous industry and it's a massive industry. So when our founders built Compass, they said, okay, we're going to build a technology platform, a technology product that real estate agents can use to be more effective, more proactive, more efficient at helping people buy homes, sell homes, find their home. And the company mission is to help everyone find their place in the world. And that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. So for me, when I think about this company, it's a massive industry. It's a massive opportunity. It's an incredibly broad and distributed base of salespeople because real estate agents are the salespeople. And they range from part-timers to full-timers, veterans, new agents, city, suburb, transactional low, kind of lower price homes to the ultra luxury homes that take a year, 2 years, 3 years to sell. So it's a unique sales environment in that our job is to help all of those agents be more productive and more profitable. And that makes it a really cool challenge. It makes it a place where if you do the right things, you can have a massive impact and really see big numbers and see big number growth as we have. And I think we've got a great opportunity in front of us and continue our growth pattern up, which makes the job harder. And I think that's why we're all here. We don't want an easy job. We want to see things get harder because they're actually getting better.
I agree with that 100%. And I want to ask a few questions about what you just commented on, but just to give everybody a size of the scope of Compass, I mentioned it in the introduction, but give us a sense for annual revenue, give us a sense for growth, give us a sense for how many agents are under your responsibility as Chief Sales and Strategy Officer, whatever numbers you're comfortable sharing. Obviously, don't share anything that's confidential.
Yeah, we've been pretty public about this. So we have, we did about 90 billion in transaction volume last year. As most people know, in the real estate world, the agent takes a commission. The brokerage that the agent legally has to work with takes a part of that commission. So our actual revenue last year was about 2.4 billion. We're continuing to grow quickly. Obviously, COVID interrupted everyone's plans for this year, but we feel very solid and stable with where we've been able to keep the business and the trajectory that we're still on. And we have about 15,000 agents across the country. And the interesting thing is that these are all independent contractors. So, the actual sales group doing all this revenue generation, technically they could wake up the next morning and say, I'm done with real estate. Or they could wake up the next morning and say, I'm going to Napa for 2 months. And that is in their purview. So part of the challenge we always have is not just how do you enable, but how do you really inspire? And how do you make people more productive and more successful and make it really easy for them to be just that? So, we have to think through different regions, different markets, and we're currently only domestic. We're only in the United States. We, of course, would love to be global and bring on those complexities later, but we're in about the top 25 markets in the country. So today, that's where the majority of our focus is.
Let's talk about the origins of Compass, if you're comfortable. The rap on real estate and on brokerages is it's tough business. It's, to your point, $90 billion in transaction volume, $2 billion in revenue, and that it's hard to get scale. So how did Compass achieve scale? Because it's a relatively new brokerage. It's a new business, maybe, I don't know how old it is, maybe 10 years old, maybe younger, but how has Compass grown so quickly and how has it beat out, the existing residential real estate brokerages like, Brown Harris Stevens, Douglas Elliman, all of those other places that were entrenched and have been doing business, particularly in New York for many, many years? What's the secret? What's the competitive advantage?
So I think when I look at the business today, and if I think back to what Robert and Ori did as co-founders 7 years ago, they said, okay, let's just create something better. And it has nothing against the existing competitors and the people who've been in the industry for a long time and who continue to be in the industry. Again, there are plenty of people out there who can help you buy and sell real estate. But the first genius thing I think they did was they said, we need to focus on the agent as the customer. Instead of trying to bypass the agent, the initial goal was let's take the agent and make them more productive. And let's build them technology that makes their job easier. The average agent might log into 8, 10, or 12 different systems to do their job every single day. Well, there's an easy place to be more efficient. Agents might have a CRM. Majority of them had spreadsheets or index cards. Well, there's an easy way to create some efficiency. Building them marketing tools that are easy and scalable so that they don't need to be digital marketers. It doesn't cost them more money to be marketers. It makes it much easier for them to get marketing out there to their clients. Being able to track the activities so that they can automate some of the steps that maybe they have to think about and execute on every single day. So by building for the agent, they really built a platform where agents were excited to come to Compass and where the company was providing them a really different take on the business. And for the first time in a long time, was not looking to displace them. And where many other companies target the end customer and try to build a brand with the consumer and then hand them an agent, Compass's position was always let's really empower the agent, because the agent is the one out there with the relationship with the seller, with the relationship with the buyer. So let's use technology, let's use data, and let's really become the most advanced platform that an agent can run his or her business on. And I think that started to accelerate as other agents saw this, as people saw that, okay, there is a difference in Compass marketing. There is a difference in Compass technology. And as people start to see the name and the brand more and more, it really helps people build this ubiquity assumption where, oh, Compass is everywhere. And we're not, but we're getting there. And I think that starts to accelerate over time.
Why didn't the incumbents do the same thing? Was it just slow to move? Was it sort of profit margins that they were trying to protect, kind of like classic innovator's dilemma? Why was it that there was this opening? Because, the brokerage industry is certainly, people talk about disrupting it, but to your point, they're always talking about disrupting it from the perspective of going directly to the consumer. Very rarely are they saying, let's take essentially the same business model, but make it more efficient.
Sam, I can't speak to what's in the mind or strategy of any other company. All I can say is, yes, when there's an opening you see, chances are other people see it as well. I think the difference is, for example, today Compass has over 400 product and engineering headcount. I don't know any other real estate company in the country that has that many engineers or product. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But that allows us to move faster. It allows us to build things that truly do scale with time. And I think the other challenge that the real estate industry saw for years was it was very fragmented. It was reliant upon franchise models and franchise kind of overhead commissions to be able to sustain the brokerages. And that's just not the model that Compass chose to take. I wasn't there when they chose to take the model that they did. But I think, again, when you build through technology and when you have some really brilliant executives on our team who come from really amazing places, that it makes it a little harder for people to catch up. And it doesn't mean we can slow down. In fact, it means we have to keep the speed up and we have to keep the aggressive development of more tech and use things like artificial intelligence and machine learning to be able to accelerate all of the insights we're able to provide our agents and make their job that much more productive, so that as the world gets more complicated, as marketing gets more distributed, and as people get pinged from 100 different places, that our agents really know when, how, and where to touch their clients, and that our tools are helping them do it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about just the general principles, because you came to Compass when it was big and you've helped it become much bigger. I think you did the same thing when you were at Square, and you and I were talking offline about not just a focus or emphasis on sales, but a focus and an emphasis on strategic revenue growth or generation. So when you come into an organization as large as Compass, but it really could be any organization, what are the principles for you when you're trying to take a company that's already bigger than, we deal, you and I and many other people in the sort of startup world, and they're all envious of $2 billion in revenue and $90 billion in transaction volume. But for you, that's not enough. You want to grow that. So what are the elements for taking something that has already achieved some level of scale and really trying to accelerate that growth when the denominator, the starting point is already, a couple $100 million, maybe it is $100 million. And how do you think that's different from, it's obviously very, very different, but how do you think that's different from a $20, $30 million business that's still trying to get to that $100 million mark?
I think it's all about perspective. And when you go into a company that might be 10, 20 million in revenue, if you could find a way to add $1 million to it, damn, you just added 5 or 10%. And that 5 or 10% built on the right foundation can grow to 10 or 20% and can double, triple, quadruple year over year. So those are the goals. When you come into $1 billion business, you can get discouraged. And if you say, well, I'm going to add $1 million in revenue, it's like, well, crap, that's only 1/10 of 1% of our entire revenue. But you have another advantage, which is that when you build something and you launch something, you're generally not launching it with a team of 2. You might be launching it with a team of 20. And instead of having one salesperson in charge of executing this play, you might have, again, in our case last year, 7,000, right, or 8,000. So you're able to get scale onto things you build very, very quickly, so that if you build it right, build with the right foundation, but again, also build it with a mind for scale, then you should be able to see very similar types of growth rates. Now, you might not get the 100 or 200 or 300% growth rate, but at a company of our size, that's not the goal, because that's in essence building a whole nother company within a company. You're trying to build layers. Can it be 1% this year, but then 5% next year? Can 5% then go to 10%? And now all of a sudden you're in a very different materiality of what you just built. It also means you have to have a slightly longer time horizon. If I'm a startup going from Series A to B to C, my funding windows might be 12 to 18 months. So not only do I need a rapid payback, and payback on those dollars might have to be less than 6 months, I might need a 2 or 3 or 400% ROI after that 6 months. Well, when you're a bigger business like ours, you still want those numbers, but you have a lot more flexibility and generally a much stronger runway to be able to say, okay, it can take me 9 months to get this out the door, because after those 9 months, again, I've got this massive distribution force or massive infrastructure to be able to go execute it. So I think perspective is critical. The other thing I would say is, although my career was built on sales, I have a nose for money. I have an eye for money. That's what I wake up thinking about, not in a crazy way, but my goal every day is, how do I grow revenue? But then something that was built into me in a small company that I worked in called Structured Web is that you have to build through product. And just putting 100 salespeople gets you revenue, it doesn't get you scale. And then at Square, it can't just be through product, it's got to be through the right product and the right incentives, because again, Square had plenty of resources and plenty of money, but that means it could also go do 100,000 different things, but only a few of those were going to get funded. So learning how to really think through how would product build this instead of just doing it manually? How would I tie an engineering team to this so that when we build it, again, even though we might have a user base in year one that's very small, maybe in 2 or 3 years, this user base is in the millions. And building a product for millions is a drastically different thing from building a B2B product that might be used by hundreds or thousands. So those are just kind of different dimensions I've been forced to add to my thought process and to my strategic planning that came from force and now kind of are part of just the way I think and the way I think you have to build in a company of this size.
Does that mean that, I'm just thinking in my head, that if the time horizon is longer, to your point, and you're looking for, it might be 5 or 10% growth, but on $1 billion, that's a significant amount of money. And because the time horizon and the payback period is going to be extended, does that mean that you have to, sort of like in the Amazon style, be constantly running a series of controlled experiments to understand where the winners will be so that you can fund the winners? Because it seems like one of the dangers of trying to make these big bets is that, you're not going to know if they work for a year. And if they don't work, now you're a year behind where you might have been if you'd made a different bet.
So it's very similar. Again, we all come from sales backgrounds. Like, it's very similar to enterprise sales. You can wait on an enterprise deal for 14 months and realize at month 15, oh crap, this isn't going anywhere. I just wasted a year and a quarter on a deal. So you've got to be able to set very early milestones and very early kind of checkpoints to say, is this actually on track to doing what we want it to do? So it does force you to do a little bit more user testing, a little bit more market analysis and market research, so that you can feel very confident when you launch something, A, it's just going to work, and B, it's just going to scale. And the scale can happen because you've tested a few things and the market's waiting for this and there's an opening for it. And then it's just a matter of execution risk as you get closer. The other aspect of enterprise sales that kind of works in just the concept of enterprise planning is that it won't be just about you. You're going to have to bring a lot of other teams along the way. And it almost grows in a geometric setting where it's like, okay, you can have an idea, an N of 1, but then to be able to get this through and out the door, N of 1 becomes, okay, now a team of 2, and then 2 has to bring in 2 more people. Now you're at 4, and 4 quickly becomes 8. And, you've got marketing and product and, support and operations, potentially legal, regulatory, finance, depending on the product. You could have all these teams. So you also need to be really good along the way of keeping people apprised of what you're working on, what will come, and then what you will need from them come the time that you need it, so that everything starts to move in dovetail. And yeah, your kind of strategic plan starts to look like a Gantt chart, where it's like project A starts today and it's running, project B starts next week, and you've almost got all these plates being spun around you at all times. One of the tricks to being able to spin a lot of plates is knowing which one needs attention when. So I think you develop a sixth sense for, this is fine, I can delegate and hand it over, versus this needs a lot of manual torque to keep it moving and keep it spinning. And that's more about knowing yourself and a very clear awareness of what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you tend to see early, what you tend to miss early, and having people around you keeping you on track and having other people chime in along the way to make sure this thing looks exactly the way you're seeing it. Otherwise, like you said, you could be 6 months down the line and you built the wrong product, or you have the wrong initiative targeting the wrong customer persona. So marketing looks at you like you got 25 heads and like, this won't work because XYZ. The goal is to eliminate a lot of those I wish I knew scenarios and to eliminate them or change trajectory as early in the process as possible.
What are the skills that, you mentioned you have to know what you're good at and what you're not good at. For you, what are the things that, you realized you weren't good at, or the skills that it wasn't going to be worthwhile to continue to invest personally in, but you were going to need to build people around you that could tackle or accomplish those qualities? What were those for you?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter. And I think for most people with as much experience as we have, it's like you can be good at anything. It's just a matter of putting enough time, energy, and commitment into it to making sure that you are. I mean, there are things that maybe you need to be professionally trained in that without that you can't do the job. But for me, I think I'm very good at getting into the weeds and the real nitty gritty detail, but knowing immediately when to get out. I need to be able to understand the levers. I need to be able to understand the matrix. I need to understand the model. What I don't need to do is how to go manipulate it until 3 o'clock in the morning. There are people who could do that in their sleep and often do it in their sleep because they're just phenomenal at it. And this has become the muscle that they've been able to work out and build up. I know that I'm much better at thinking globally, and I'm much better at thinking kind of all these different parts and how do they move together. What I don't think I'm as great at is to take one of those parts, go to the nitty gritty detail and say, okay, this thing I'm going to focus on for the next year. And it's not that I'm not good at it because that's a skill. I just think there are people who love that stuff and love to get into the weeds and sit there and really tinker. But then I've got to be able to put that next to the next piece and the next piece and the next piece and see how all these things work together. And hopefully, like a good conductor, right, make sure that the sound operates synergistically and gives you this symphonic response versus this kind of chaos, disruption, or cacophony of just mismatched sounds and pieces. I think also as a company grows, you've got to be able to predict where does the curve break or where does the curve change shape. Because if you look at even a stock market, like, yes, in the long run, it looks nice and smooth up and to the right. But as you get closer and to keep the window shorter and shorter, you see a lot of turbulence and a lot of ups and downs. And for me, it's like, okay, at what point does the existing set of assumptions no longer hold? And what will happen then? And then what do I need to be prepared for at that point? Whether it's scale, whether it's entering a new market, does our model in the US work? In the UK, okay, let's start testing some variables. Let's go through a thought experiment of what will and will not hold. And then, okay, if that breaks, what happens then? So that at least in your mind, you've worked through all the different dimensions. That's something I think I enjoy doing. I think I'm pretty good at it. And I think the most important thing you've got to be good at if you're leading any large organization, you've got to be able to inspire people. You've got to be able to share a vision. People have to feel tied into that vision, and that the concept of what's in it for them and why we're doing this, the why is such a critical part of leading any big organization.
One of the things that I'm sure is a challenge, but maybe it's a skill at this point, probably, my impression is that it is just getting along with other executives. To your point, you have to bring along so many other people. And when you're joining a new large company as an executive, my sense, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, my sense is that there's, it's sort of like an organism accepting a new antibody into the bloodstream or something like that. Like you can be rejected if you don't handle it the right way, or you can be accepted. And it's all, they talk about the first 90 days. I'm not sure if it's really 90 or if it's 180. I'm not sure exactly what the right time frame is for getting your feet wet in a new position as an executive at a large company and then executing your plan. But what's your approach when, in your first, whatever time period you think is appropriate, when you were new to Square or new to Compass, to make sure that, you didn't piss off everybody, and to your point, you didn't uninspire people, and that you made change, but you did it while bringing people along with you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think is important to anyone going into an existing organization or an organization that's had a lot of success. And I don't think it's about getting along with. Hopefully, that's not a concern for someone. It's more about how do you fit in? How do you build partnerships? How do you build trust? I would probably break it down to three things. One is a saying I heard a long time ago, which is seek to understand before you seek to be understood, right? Know what's happening, know why it's happening, know why decisions that have been made were made. Because a lot of times you go into a company with a ton of ideas and you're assuming, well, that's broken and this could be better. And maybe everyone looks at you and says, yeah, you're absolutely right. Those things are all broken and they can all be better. But here's what we chose to do instead, because again, everything is a finite amount of resources, finite amount of time. So again, I think just really asking 100,000 questions about why things are the way they are does a whole lot. And it also, again, simultaneously builds trust. with those execs that you're seeking to understand the business and not just coming in with these assumptions that you have no foundation for. I think the second is just time out of the office, building personal relationships with people, because the more time you spend with someone, generally speaking, the more you've shared, the more easy it is to trust each other. I think trust is a critical part of this, because I know that if I disagree with someone vehemently, that person is disagreeing with me for valid reasons. And I think that's a really safe place to be able to have open communication, open dialogue, challenging conversations. And the third is never make a subjective argument. Your argument should be subjective, but only subjective based on objective data. And if everyone can agree on the objectivity and the validity of the data and the numbers we're all seeing, well, that's the reality. Now, I might choose to do something different with the data or interpret them a certain way, but at least let's all ground ourselves in the real numbers. And once you ground in reality, it's very hard to take things personally. And it's much easier to at least look at the things the same way. And then again, just make the decision at the end of the day of what you do moving forward. And sometimes that decision is a disagree and commit decision. And sometimes you've got to walk away, from something. If you've ever played poker, it's very hard to fold a hand on the river, at the end, because you've committed money, you've committed time, you felt good about it all along the way. But many of the best poker players will say that things that saved them in their career was knowing and being comfortable when to walk away from some of those last minute bad decisions, even though the sunk cost was there and you were pot committed. There's no room for that. The goal is to drive revenue. The goal is to grow the business or cut costs or launch something. So everyone should be aligned on the goals, aligned on the data that you're making the decision on, and then align on the decision and move on afterwards.
One of the things that happens sometimes is that people can't align on the data because different departments are producing similar data. Do you try to consolidate? Sometimes there's a sales operations or revenue operations team, and they're producing win rates, they're producing bookings numbers, they're producing financial data, and then sometimes the office of the CFO is also producing data, and sometimes, or the marketing team is talking about leads and the sales team is talking about leads. Do you find that one part of the work that you do is trying to consolidate data into one department, even if it's not a department that you own, as long as there's one single source of truth?
I think there has to be one single source of truth. And I think if there are two different sources of that truth, the first thing you have to do is consolidate them and align them. And something that I think has helped, and it takes time, so you've got to be willing to put the time in, is, for example, before I would ever see a data set and our CFO, for example, at Square would ever see a data set, the sales operations team and the finance partner would meet to review everything to make sure, do we align that these are the right numbers and that we're all viewing them the same way? Okay, great. Check that box. The worst thing you could do is stand up in front of a meeting, either you as the exec or with another exec, and neither of you can agree that even what you're looking at is real. That's a waste of everyone's time. So yes, you have to get alignment. You've got to check that box. And over time, that should happen in a more automated sense. And the more people can pull from the same central data warehouse in any company, the better. But as we all know, as companies grow, as you build new software, plug in third-party software, launch new initiatives, you end up with this Frankenstein's monster of data structures. So it's what I described as what you ideally want to do and sometimes have to do. But of course, as a company scales and as it becomes more mature, you've got to pay the piper, and you've got to be able to put the time and effort into consolidating data structures, cleaning them, and making them accessible to everyone, but then also have them mirrored so that if I manipulate a data set on my side, the central data team can see that. And then that there's always the original copy, and then there's my copy, because maybe my copy ends up being a different view or a different structure that other teams are going to be able to utilize. So that's how you also build scale into data warehousing.
When you think about, again, you're overseeing thousands and thousands and thousands of agents, you're helping run a multi-billion-dollar business, but there was a time when you didn't have any of this experience. There's a lot of people that want to have your job, and there's two paths. Maybe they perceive there to be two paths. I'm sure there are more than two paths. One path is become senior at a small company, and hopefully that company either wins or something good happens, and they have more responsibility earlier and are faced with different challenges where they have accountability and responsibility earlier. But the company is not Compass and it's not Square. It's a smaller, lesser known company. And then there's another path where you sort of maybe this is an unfair word to use, but you toil in kind of like middle management for a period of time, but you have Square, Compass, Salesforce, Slack, whatever. You have those big name brands on your resume. And from there, maybe it's a longer journey, but ultimately perhaps that journey has more predictability around ending as chief sales officer and strategy officer of Compass. When you think about advice that you would give to young people, where do you fall on that spectrum of choices? And feel free to tell me that it's a false choice. I'm happy to be wrong or correct.
Well, I think it goes back to a question you asked earlier, which is knowing what you're good at and knowing where you want to put your time and attention. Right? I have amazing friends. I have amazingly intelligent, successful friends who would hate 75% of the job I do today and probably 60% of the job I did at Square. Because a lot of it is getting alignment, briefing other teams, building consensus, sharing ideas and potentially walking away from ideas, right? Because that's what you have to do in bigger companies. And yes, what do you get for that? You get this cool name and this cool brand. But what you might not get is freedom. You might not get as much autonomy. So do you want to be someone who's anchored on action and being able to build 0 to 1, 1 to 5, or do you want to be the person who goes from 100 to 200? Because those are two very different days. And the way you spend your day is very different. I think also, do you want to be able to say, okay, I've built multiple small companies, and therefore I can easily be an executive of a smaller company. And maybe that translates into running a division or being a GM or a president of a smaller part of a much bigger company. So I think it does give the flexibility. I think, again, it's much more the idea of what do you want to do every day? How do you want to spend your time? What are you really good at? And in 10 or 20 years, chances are those paths start to cross very quickly. A lot of small companies get bought by big companies. A lot of small companies partner with big companies. So you get a chance to get the exposure both sides. I think the key is just know what you want. And if you're not in a position to get it today, how do you start to nudge yourself in that position more and more? Whether it be taking on more responsibility, whether it be offering to advise other companies, even for free, right? So that you get that internal exposure to some companies that might look a little different from your current organization. But then also realizing that your job today may not look anything close to the job that you think you want in the future. And then when you go get that job, you might realize, okay, this is either amazing or this is terrible. I want to go back to a smaller company, or I want to go back to the stability and structure of a bigger company. I think a lot of it is just, to thine own self be true.
And you figured all of this out. I mean, did you do formal work, or was it just trial and error and, sitting in a meeting saying, I really like this, and being in a different situation saying, man, this sucks? Like, how did you come to these answers?
So I ran my own company for 9 years. And, so one of the things that I always had was autonomy and freedom and flexibility. And the first question someone asked me when I took a role, this was at Structured Web, they're like, well, how did you decide to give up the entrepreneurial freedom for working a corporate job? I was like, well, one of the main requirements for me is I still had to feel like I had freedom and the autonomy and the ability to execute. And I did. So for me, it was accepting that I can actually have both. And if you want both, you just have to be very clear about that. And that means you're going to walk away from other opportunities, or maybe you're just not right for other opportunities because maybe a company doesn't need someone with autonomy. They need someone just to execute. And they have a very predictable, rigid, but probably profitable and scalable sales structure or revenue generation structure. And that's all they needed to do is just go hammer it and do it every day. That I knew very quickly it's just not the linear mind I have. I need to be more of a generalist. I need to be able to scale myself as well. And then also at that company, we were dealing with very large enterprise companies, 100 billion, 300 billion, market cap companies. And I also recognize, what? I can't imagine doing what those people do every day because their focuses were so narrow and the niches were so granular because the companies were massive and, again, very successful businesses. I just saw what I got to do every day as more of a generalist and saw what they got to do as more of a kind of a niche specialist. And yes, they had the structure of a big company, the 401k matching of a big company, the probably much higher compensation, right, of a big company. But what they didn't have for me is the enrichment, the innovation, the testing, the experimental nature that I tend to love. So again, I think it also comes back to just knowing and recognizing in yourself what you love and what you're good at.
That makes a lot of sense. Michael, we're coming to the end of our time together, or towards the end of it. And this is a part of the podcast where we like to kind of pay it forward. And we want to hear about people that have influenced you. People, it doesn't have to be people. It could be important books that you've read that really changed your life. Content that has helped form you. When you think about those kinds of either people or influences that you think we should know about, who are some of those influences? Who are some of those people? What are some of those books?
I mean, that's really broad, but also I appreciate the ability to share.
You just said you like to be a generalist, and
I do.
Like...
You got me. You got me. I think I'm going to give you. I'll give you a few different dimensions on that. I think the first and easiest to say is my parents. Right? They gave me the freedom and flexibility to learn and to play with things and to experiment with things, and never put that rigid structure on me. School did, of course, and other things, but it was the ability to go try things and to experiment that I think also showed me what I liked and what I didn't like, and the things that I found interest in and the things I didn't find interest in. I think there was a specific book I remember reading. It was called The Facebook Effect by David Kirkpatrick. And I just remember thinking to myself, and this is when I owned my business, like, wow, that's a really cool story. And it's more of like the official version of how Facebook grew and how they launched and everything is. And it's what really triggered me to say, I need to dig into more tech startups, and I need to understand how this world works. And I need to understand how venture works, because that's a fascinating world, which led me to probably my favorite venture investor, which is Peter Thiel. Everything the guy touches seems to turn to gold. And as a co-founder of multiple businesses, not just the massive one being PayPal, but also Palantir and Founders Fund being one of the most successful venture arms in the world, and just seeing how he looks at business and hearing some of his speeches about how he thinks about startups is, to me, an incredibly mind-blowing mentality, but also seeing that he puts his money where his mouth is and also is willing to support kind of a non-traditional approach to education, which maybe the world is ready, for something like that. And, I think back to Jack Dorsey and the time at Square, just someone who pushed the envelope so much on innovation and living in the future and thinking about the future, but always grounding it in the reality of how do we help people solve a problem today. And if you can solve a problem today, but you have a really cool vision for what that can do in 5 years, you can build a Square and a Cash App and a Twitter and other things that are, pretty incredible innovative sides. So I try to put it all together in my mind and say, I learn from everyone. I learn from everything. Every day for me is a chance to learn something new, to teach something new, because teaching to me is the highest level of learning anyway. So that's what I'm trying to do every day, is how do I take in more so I can share more?
That's fantastic. Michael, if folks want to reach out to you, if they are listening to this, maybe they want to work for you at Compass, or maybe they something you said resonated. Are you open to that? And do you have a preferred mechanism or medium for communication? LinkedIn, email. How should people get in touch with you if you're open to it?
Yeah, I mean, always open. I think LinkedIn, professionally is probably the first place to start. It's an easy place for professionals to gather. I have a Twitter, but you'll see I just tend to complain a lot, like most people, using Twitter. So probably not the most positive version of myself that gets exposed there.
What are you complaining about recently?
Usually government inefficiency, tax policy, weather, you name it, all the common things we all complain about.
Fair enough. So great. So we'll follow you on LinkedIn, and then we'll talk to you. We've got another show coming up called Friday Fundamentals, and we'll talk to you then. But Mike, Perfect. Thanks so much for being on the show. It's been great chatting with you.
Thanks, Sam. Have a great day.
You too.
Appreciate it.
Hey folks, Sam's Corner. Great conversation with Michael Coscetta. I think the thing I just came away with was the horsepower, the intelligence, and Michael's ability to really think at scale and to be both tactical and strategic at the same time. I think the other thing, we talked about this, but if you want to have influence at a large organization, it's really not just about the things that you're directly responsible for. It's also about your ability to influence other stakeholders, including the rest of the executive team. And that takes a lot of work. And that's why when you're thinking about, am I a big company person or a small company person, you really have to figure out, do you like the process of convincing people, of persuading people. Not everybody's going to work for you, particularly big companies. And to move a big company, you need a lot of different pieces moving in the same direction in a coordinated way at the same time. So you have to think, do you like that process? Do you like that process of persuasion? Do you like that process of a large group coming to a decision over a period of weeks and months? Or do you just want to move, break stuff, make decisions? Who cares if it's not, perfect? Perfect is the enemy of the good. You value speed over, consensus. And I think in that case, that might be a small company decision. But I think Michael walked through some of the challenges of how do you grow, how do you scale, particularly when you're new to an organization, and how do you deliver great growth. So I really like that conversation. I really like him. Glad he's a member of Revenue Collective. He's an important member of Revenue Collective for us. And without further ado, thanks to our sponsors. If you want to reach me, by the way, you can, linkedin.com/Sam F. Jacobs. We still want to thank our sponsor. Thanks to Conga, the leading solution to accelerate the documents and processes driving your business. Find out more at conga.com. And of course, Outreach, the #1 sales engagement platform. You can reach them at outreach.io. Without further ado, we'll talk to you next time.
I can't just smile.